Good morning and welcome. My name is Ian McLean and I'm President and CEO of the Greater Kitchener-Waterloo Chamber of Commerce. I want to thank you for taking time out of your busy schedules to hear more about immigration in the region and how you can invest in your workforce. Many employers are struggling to find employees to staff their businesses and are seeking skilled foreign workers to help alleviate current labor shortages. Over the last number of years, the process of hiring workers from abroad has been streamlined, making it increasingly time efficient and simpler than many may realize. Today we are fortunate to be joined by a couple of speakers who are well versed in immigration law to provide the information and advice that you may need to fulfill your talent needs. I want to start by thanking the Immigration Partnership of Waterloo Region. Tara and her team work very closely with me and the Chamber staff on a number of different projects and programs, and we want to thank them for their title sponsorship today of this event and bringing this topic and issue to the forefront. I'd also like to thank our hosts here at the Doubletree by Hilton in Kitchener for their hospitality. Just before we get going on the formal part of the session this morning, I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge that we do live and work on the traditional territory of the Attawandaron, Anishinaabe, and Haudenosaunee peoples, as we seek a renewed relationship based on the foundation of mutual respect and understanding. I'll do a little infomercial here for the partnership. I think on your table you'll find a sheet that talks about networking with immigrant job seekers. That's the 12th Annual Global Skills Conference. It's an amazing day. It's at the Crown Plaza on March the 5th from 3 to 4:30. You can get a booth if your business wants to participate in that, but it is well worth attending. It's a complimentary event. So please do book your exhibit table now, and I think you do that through Nora. Is that correct, Nora? Through Nora at the partnership. So just wanted to draw that to your attention. And at this point, I'd like to welcome Tara Bedard. She is the Executive Director of the Immigration Partnership of Waterloo Region to the stage to help introduce today's speakers. Tara. Stairs are there.
Thank you, Ian, and good morning, everybody. The Immigration Partnership is proud to partner with the Chamber to present today's breakfast. I'm going to take these off, actually, but too close. So for more than 10 years, the Immigration Partnership has brought together business, community organizations, our area municipalities, post-secondary institutions, and individual residents in Waterloo Region to create conditions for immigrants and refugees to succeed and to contribute to a vibrant community. As Ian was mentioning, the country's going through some demographic challenges, and I'm sure that many of you are feeling this in your businesses. The Conference Board of Canada projects that a 1.6 million person gap between the number of people leaving the workforce and the number of people entering it over the next 20 years. In our work with employers across Waterloo Region, we hear the pressures that this is already causing, and we know that immigration will in part help to drive business forward for a thriving economy. We work closely with employers in Waterloo Region to understand their talent needs and to help find solutions focused on the hiring and retention of immigrant talent. And so I'm very pleased today to introduce a few speakers to answer many of the questions we know employers have about hiring immigrants. The first speaker today is Jennifer Roggemann of Jennifer Roggemann Law Office. This is a boutique firm focused exclusively on Canadian immigration law. Both Jennifer and her husband are first-generation Canadians who have worked hard to make their dreams a reality. Although their families come from different countries, they share a common dream, wanting to give their kids a better life. Jennifer came to Canada from South Korea in grade 11 and didn't speak any English. It was then that she decided she wanted to become a lawyer and to help those who couldn't speak for themselves. She has helped hundreds of people find a new home in Canada. Our second speaker this morning is Bill MacGregor of Gowling WLG. Bill is a partner and leads the firm's national immigration group. His practice focuses exclusively on corporate and business immigration, delivering solutions that support the smooth cross-border movement of foreign nationals and personnel while ensuring employers remain compliant with immigration rules and regulations. Bill brings years of experience advising clients on all aspects of corporate immigration, including international transfers and hires. Following their presentations, there will be opportunities for questions. So please join me in welcoming both Bill and Jennifer to the stage.
There you go. Bill and I kind of use this chair just before you guys come, and it's a little bit precarious, and I do wear a skirt, so last thing I want, I topple myself off the stage, so I will stand. I just wanted to share a little bit about what I learned last night. I had a pleasure of having a dinner with a very exclusive number of CIC with Ambassador of Canada, Brazil. And she shared something about Kitchener-Waterloo, and I was so impressed with that, and I want to share with people who actually made that true, and I think it's important. She was meeting with a very prominent business person in Brazil, and he requested a meeting with ambassadors. So she was all geared up, you know, telling him about the Canada and how to bring the business and a whole 9 yards. And the businessman comes and said, I have 3 daughters. I sent one to study in California, one to upstate New York, and one to Kitchener-Waterloo. And after 1 year studying there, and he asked 3 daughters, how was it? And the person in California said that the first daughter said, it was horrible, it's expensive, it's busy, people are not nice, I want to come home. Second daughter, same thing in upstate New York. Third daughter, who ended up in Kitchener-Waterloo, I love it. People are friendly, I made friends, I love studying there, actually we should move up there. And that's why the father came and says, are people in Kitchener-Waterloo that nice that I should move there? I want to know more about people in Kitchener-Waterloo. And that was one of the part she came to visit Kitchener-Waterloo. So congratulations to all of you for that to happen. So I'm going to do a little bit of a disclaimer for both of us. We kind of reached the age, we do need glasses for certain things and no glasses for certain things. So this is going to come down and up, just because, not a cosmetic reason, but practical reasons, so just bear with us. Second, I know that some of the talk that we talk about is how to bring people from outside to inside to Canada. But there are people already inside of Canada I call low-hanging fruits you can access to. We can talk about that, but not as much. So just bear with us. But if you have certain questions, so for example, how to post your jobs so that more immigrants can be attracted to, we can talk about that as a question and answer session. But both Bill and I, we're going to concentrate on how to bring fresh blood into the town. Are we good? So, every talk before I start, I do a little, like a quick and dirty survey. So how many people actually gone through the immigration system, any kind of immigration system, personally for yourself? Excellent. How many people have gone through that last 5 years? Excellent, thank you. So we're gonna use some acronyms. So if you guys have like, what the heck is LMIA? Please feel free to raise your hand and Jennifer, what the heck is LMIA? I am not offended. Unfortunately, in the area of immigration law, we do use lots of short form. Sometimes when I meet the immigration officer, we talk, and my husband, who happened to stand beside me, and said, that is a language of its own, because I had no idea what you guys are talking about, so just bear with us. And whoever has that light, bear with me, it's really, really brightening my eyes and killing me. Anybody who's actually controlling these lights. I just want to also talk about our context we're talking about. Last week, January 16, I don't know how anybody's seen that in record. There was a record indicating that employers in the Waterloo region are having a tough time filling vacancies. I don't know how many people actually read that one. And this was January 16, which was last week. And one of the interesting statistics, and they were actually mentioning, was because everybody wants numbers. So number one reason they were talking about is not enough applicant. That's 54%, lack of a qualification, 48%, lack of a motivation, attitude was 44%. So I understand the lack of applicant, I can understand lack of a qualification, but lack of attitude and motivation, I thought it was kind of interesting. Unfortunately, I hear that a lot, that I have a client who says, well, Jennifer, we have 100 applicants, we ask for 20 people for interview, 2 people show up. Does that your experience like that these days? Yes, no, maybe, yes, thank you. So, since some of you know about immigration a little bit, let me just do the overview of immigration, like 2 seconds, okay? In order to come to Canada, there's a 2 major ways, I call it major highway to Canada. One is you bring people temporarily. You come, stay for very specific purposes, then you get out. There's a particular date they must get out, and the purpose of their coming here has to be very specific, either work or going to Niagara Falls or study. That's a very broad generalization. So I call it 407 highway. You have to pay, there's at the end of the road, and you must get out. Permanent resident application, the permanent resident the pathway, I call it 401. You jump in anytime, you stay here forever, you can go from Atlantic Ocean all the way to the Pacific Ocean. You're here to stay. So there's a 3 pathway there is that you can come if you have a sponsorable, eligible sponsor in Canada, sponsor your family sponsorship, so your spouses, your mom and dad, so on and so forth. Or the economic application is the people who have a skill set, education, language, basically said, I like Canada, I like to choose Canada where I belong. And third path is, of course, refugees. Now, I just want to make a 2-second comments on refugees. In our composition of an annual target for immigration, refugee is pretty much less than 5%. So 55% plus is economic applicants, the people who come because they have a skill set, education, language, etc. About 30 to 35% is a family sponsorship. 10% is a humanitarian and compassionate applicant, including refugees. So when you talk about some of the big newspaper articles, you have to put it into a context. We're talking about a fairly small portion of the people we're talking about. Now, if you, like I talked about low-hanging fruits, so to speak. So we're talking about the, sorry, I have my alarm on, waking up my kids. Low-hanging fruits are people who are already here, so we don't have to deal with the people who have to come into Canada. So for example, I'm trying to bring somebody from Panama right now, and it takes me 6 weeks for a work permit because they need to get the entry permit to Canada. So people from China, India, for example. India is one country, a lot of software engineers, a lot of IT workers are coming these days. Those countries need entry permits. So sometimes what I get the question from employers are like this. Well, Jennifer, I have 3 excellent candidates. One is from Panama, one is from India, one is from South Korea. Which one is the fastest? And I have to go with South Korea because South Korea does not require an entry permit. So if it's the same equalized like opportunity, like equal candidate, they can literally come to Toronto Airport tomorrow and get a work permit at Toronto. So in terms of speed-wise, it's a lot to do with whether they require to enter into Canada or not. Let's talk about that entry permit because a lot of people don't talk about it. Because if people are from, I hate to say it, is this recorded? I shouldn't say it then. The friendly nations, we call it. If they're from friendly nations, you don't need entry permit, such as Holland, England, give me some, France, South Korea, Japan, Australia, New Zealand, etc. So those people don't need an entry permit, which means they can come to Canada. But this landscape changed in 2015. 2015, Immigration Canada instituted a very interesting system called ETA, Electronic Travel Authorization. Do you remember the day that Trump got elected in the United States? And there was like a huge story, so, oh my goodness, our immigration network went down because everybody wanted to come to Canada. Well, the truth of the matter is the day after the U.S. election is the first day, Canadian immigration make it mandatory for all travelers to Canada who do not need entry permit must have this electronic travel authorization. $7 online, 15 minutes should be done. But if you have millions of people doing it at the same time, yes, those people who's working in the network software places, it doesn't matter how good is the network, it's going to go down. That's what happened. Now, what does this ETA actually ask about? Ask about your background in criminality and medical history, very broadly speaking. But there is about 5 to 7 countries in the world do ask the same thing, like United States, New Zealand, Australia, etc. Every question is different. Every country has a different question. Canada has the most difficult question because we ask, have you ever been arrested, charged, convicted, sentenced, and in jail? So if and it finishes with or sentencing. So if you got stopped and went to the police station, arrested, the answer is yes. How many people do you think actually notice that? Very few people. And then the finishing is in any country in the world. So it's not just their home country, it can be anywhere. So if you had a really amazing vacation in Bahama and did a DUI, the answer is yes. So we're getting into trouble. So at that time, everybody said, no, it's no problem, we come in, da-da-da. What happened is that these people want to get a work permit. Then all of a sudden, I look at the file and said, sir, you had an incident, I call it an incident, in the United States. You had a wonderful time in Las Vegas about 7 years ago, and FBI has a record, and you say no in ETA. We have a problem. You enter into Canada with a line. And a lot of people said, oh, I didn't know. It was an accident, da, 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 da. And I'm kind of calling, duck is duck. You lied, you didn't say, you didn't disclose, you admitted, whatever you want to say, that's where we're going to be. So those are something that you need to think about in hiring, because I also deal with a lot of lower skill workers from Mexico. So first, believe it or not, one of the questions I do ask Mexican clients, have you ever crossed the Rio Grande River by yourself? Sounds really weird, but you'll be amazed. I have about 30% of clients that yes, I have. And I said, did you get caught? Yes. Okay, we're gonna stop right here because I have to get a report from FBI and see what happened. So those are the questions that good old days when it was not electronic the system, we can work through it. And these days, everything is on the paper. So it's somewhere. So just to be aware of some of the challenges that we do. Now, I'm going to focus on the Ontario program and federal program. Bill's going to focus on C-level executive and the high skills and a little bit about LMIA. So both of us can stay here, talk for like 5 to 7 hours. So, just stay back, and I'm sure there's a leftover we can eat for lunch. But I probably have about a 7 minute left in my calculation, so I'm going to go to a very speedy way. Now, there is no way I can tell you every program. Like that's the disclaimer right off the bat. The reason is that there's so many. So let's say, for sake of our argument, that you have a client who's open work permit and you want to hire them. Great, no problem. But there's open work permit usually have expiry day. And maybe that person's wife is going to school in Conestoga. Excellent. But how do you keep them for more than what's on it? Because a lot of times people show up in our offices, they usually show, if we're lucky, they show up 3 months before, usually about 2 weeks before expiry day. We just realized that it's gonna expire. Oh, liar, pants on fire, because you know exact that day on your tattoo in your mind, okay? So that's not true. So what can employer do? And says, Jennifer, I had this person for 6 months. Amazing person, I'm willing anything to keep him in my company. So easiest the one that I usually say, let's do the labor market impact assessment. But one of the things employer hates the most is the advertising. Well, I have a candidate, Jennifer. That seems to be kind of a lying if I do the advertisement. What if we find the person? Then do I hire this person? There's a whole 9, amazing enough, last year, so 12 months, most clients actually did advertisement from my clientele and hired more people because they need more people. So that's been working out pretty well. But the labor market impact assessment is a pain in the butt. I'll just put it up there. If you didn't think that way, I'll just tell you, it is a pain in the butt, okay? So what happened is that some people said, okay, you know what, I only have this much time. So labor market impact assessment is get you fastest at this point of time. Sometimes the applicant may have longer period of time with respect to work experience. If this person have a more than 2-year work experience for work that he or she's been doing for your employer, we also suggest the Ontario Immigration the program. Now, immigration itself is a federal jurisdiction. But long time ago, the Quebec government said, we need more French, so we give them a little bit. Then Nova Scotia said, we do fishermen. We need some loggers in British Columbia. We need some miner. We need some farmers in Manitoba. So over the years, it just exploded like crazy. So when I mentioned about 55% of our immigration is the worker, translated based on 300,000 target, roughly speaking, we're talking about 160 to 165,000. Out of that, half is now selected by province, half. So Quebec has the biggest chunk, which is about 45,000. Ontario is the second largest, and last year we got 7,450 people. So BC is a little bit behind the 6,500. Finally, Ontario beat BC because BC used to have more. We got more this time. Now, in Ontario program, there's 9 different programs, various programs as to the entrepreneur class all the way to the international student stream. So I'm not going to go through all 9 of them because I don't have time for that, but that's available. Now, brand new program coming in for one of the things that you probably noticed maybe over the weekend is that Ontario, the government just announced a new category called the in-demand stream. So in-demand was there about 3 years ago, I believe. So it started with the farm workers. So there's only 6 categories of occupation we could do. Farm workers, the horticultural workers, then it was a really, really small. Then last year they said, oh, let's expand a little bit. So we have a home support workers and the truck drivers. Truck drivers a big one. So it's 10 categories. Now we just announced 11 more occupation. 11 more occupation is very interesting because it's mostly manufacturing sector. So these are the machine assembler, machinist, and so on and so forth. The people who's actually working on the floor that we couldn't bring them here, but now they're basically saying not only you can bring, but they can stay, and their whole family can come, and they can settle and become permanent residents. So in terms of retention-wise, you have a guaranteed employee for 3+ years, and very happy workers because they are thrilled to be in Canada. By the way, if you ever have blue in the morning, about I'd say 85% of a population on the universe, their biggest dream is come to Canada, live here. So when you look at yourself in the morning in a mirror, I am living somebody's dream. That should perk you up and says, hey, I live somebody's dream. I love that statement. Every time I feel like, oh man, I don't want to start the day, that's the first thing I said. I'm living somebody's dream. Now, where was I? You guys are supposed to help me, come back, Jennifer, come back from wherever you were. So 11, as I say, 11 new occupation under the provincial nominee program. One of the exciting part is Toronto cannot get it. It's only for employers who are located outside of a GTA. Yay, come on, this is one of the few times that we get a benefit over Toronto, okay? So we should do a little bit of a happy dance there. Now, another brand new program which was announced last Labor weekend. I don't know why Immigration Canada always announces special stuff over the Christmas season, Labor weekend, the first day of vacation, I don't get it, but they do that. So it's called a Federal Agri-Food Immigration Pilot. What that does is certain sectors, especially livestock, they're raising farms like cows and porks and turkeys. Have you ever been to turkey raising farm? It's really fascinating. I never been there, but it was very interesting. I like to learn about my employer, so I do tour about my employer's facility. They get very excited about it because it's kind of show and tell time for their business, and I'm excited to learn about them because I've never been on farm sometimes, so this is really fun. Anyway, so what happened is that our food processing area, the industry and farm industry, we have, it's not I cannot even say critical, it's acute crisis in terms of a worker. So let me translate that into your life. If turkey price goes up for Thanksgiving, Easter, and Christmas, because there's nobody to raise the turkey. So I cannot call my clients whole month of October, whole month of November, December, because unless I want to raise a turkey, they're not going to talk to me. That's how bad it is right now. So I think we have brought just one farm, over 20 people working on a farm worker. So federal government recognized that, and what happened was that these industries and the workers who's really good workers, who's been working for 1 year for Ontario or across Canada, if they are working for the Canadian the employer, they can actually increase the length of time they can work in Canada from 1 to 2 years, and they can facilitate their immigration through federal government without going through the provincial government. Now, the details are going to come in March and starting on April 1st. It's not an April Fool joke. They actually going to start in April 1st, which is kind of scary. I'm just trying to think. Now, I think there was one gentleman who talked about the buying and selling businesses in this region. It is a very interesting area. If you are over 35 years old, your chance of coming to Canada is pretty tough. Okay, just raise your hand, that's shocked, just kidding. So if you are over 44, your age will knock you off on the grading system to come to Canada as a skilled worker. So I'm over 44. If you don't have a bachelor degree or even master degree, now it's still hard. If you don't speak English fluent, now you're really toasted. There's no regular way. So when I deal with the business people, most of them in mid-30s, mid-40s, they have finished their high school. They're amazing people, incredible entrepreneur, but they don't necessarily speak fluent English. They may speak and joke, and if they have a couple of beer, they probably speak better. But other than that, if they do the testing, probably not come close to it. So why are we having trouble with bringing a skilled worker these days? Last, I say 6 to 12 months, roughly speaking, we have a really high score. It used to be you probably heard, have you heard of Express Entry? All right, Express Entry people. So it started on January 1st of 2015 for the new federal program. Basically, what I basically say is that it's not a first come, first serve anymore. It's the best and the brightest Immigration Canada will choose. So there are certain scores that you're going to get based on education, age, and so on and so forth. I was successful as low as a 412 point on that score. I mean, that's unheard of these days. Right now is a 470. So there's about 60 point differences. It's because of English. We have a lot of British clients. I don't know why from British Kingdom they want to come. I mean, even Prince want to come to Canada, so what can I say about that? So, it's not good enough to be England, So, and then, of course, that a lot of Americans are coming to Canada. A lot of Canadians who have settled in the United States are returning. So, just to guess what language they speak. They speak English as a native tongue. So anybody whose first language is not English, French, they have a problem in getting through regular channel. That's why the employers' support to get them settled in this region, as well as to get through the system, is as important. But also that gives you the opportunity to attract these brilliant people to our region, because one of the things that I believe when I'm doing my work, nobody chooses to be born where they're born, but they all have a right to choose where they belong. A lot of people, when I say a lot of people, I talk with a lot of people. This is a place they choose to belong. And employers who want the good employees, this is an awesome opportunity to connect. So I'll stop there, let Bill do his thing, and you guys should stop me. Like, I don't know the timing, so just, I don't want to, oh, good, I actually made it in time. Thank you.
Thanks very much, and great to be here today. My focus is going to be a little bit different than Jennifer's. She talked a lot about some of the lower skill programs we have, and in the big picture, our system's sort of biased against low skill in terms of coming on a permanent basis. And given the demographic realities that were discussed in the introduction, that's going to be a problem going on. But the demographics is one of the things I wanted to start with. Clearly, it's a time bomb. Lots of studies on this. That gap in the labor force has to be addressed. And really the only source is going to be immigration to bring enough workers in to address local and national needs. But the good news, my main message is the Canadian system, there's faults of course, but generally speaking, it's transparent and predictable. And I think the government gets it in terms of trying to bring in programs and policies that is going to support that growth of skilled workers in Canada to fill that gap. My focus is going to be on the higher skilled workers. We've talked about the local sources. Jennifer's mentioned that. There's that forum coming up. So immigrants who are already here with high skills, obviously that's a great place to go to first. But that's not going to solve all of your issues as an employer when you're trying to find the right people and getting them here to work for you. You're going to have to look overseas to fill some of those gaps. So that's going to be my focus. And I'm going to try and cover three things, albeit briefly. As Jennifer said, we could go on and on this. Number one, to talk a little bit about some of the work permit options for the high-skilled type of worker. Number two, talk a little bit about the transition to permanent resident status, and the message there is it's quite doable if you do your homework. Number three, as an employer, there are some costs, there are some restrictions, there are some potential liabilities, some compliance issues you need to be aware of if you're hiring a foreign national and because of the immigration regulations. But the message there is these are manageable if you're proactive and you recognize these issues up front and do it the right way. So that's going to be the three things I'm going to discuss. Let's talk about work permits first. I can't cover all of the topics, all the options. What Jennifer and I both do day to day on the corporate immigration front would be assessing the situation. What's the position? What's the citizenship of the person? Where are they residing? Are there dependents? Are there any criminality or medical issues? We put that into the immigration pot, stir it up, and come up with the best option to bring that person here under a work permit. It's sort of picking the right menu or picking the options from the right menu and then delivering that person to that spot in Canada to work for you. That's what we focus on day to day. And the lowest hanging fruit in terms of the in terms of work permits is going to be graduates of Canadian universities who come from foreign countries. If you've seen the numbers coming into Canadian universities, foreign students, it's off the charts, tens of thousands. And even if you compare it to a few years ago, way off the charts. Despite the international competition out there from other countries for these very talented students, they're choosing Canada. And a reason for that is the postgraduate work permit program. So if you're an employer looking for talent, and of course this is more junior skilled talent, usually, because often these are people who are coming from high school and then studying here. In the Canadian system, If they're here studying on a study permit, they can work part-time for employers or on co-ops, depending on the type of study permit and work permit they have. So you can test them out early in a program over the summer. You can hire them after graduation because they're going to get a 3-year open work permit in most cases. So they've got 3 years to work in Canada after graduation. And during that time frame, in almost all cases, they're going to be able to transition to permanent resident status. So you're addressing the near term, I need someone now, but the longer term, they're going to be permanent residents here. And they've got education from Canada already. They've got exposure to living in Canada. It's the perfect candidate, really, for those junior skilled positions. So go to those job fairs, look to that source, and also in a way it addresses some of the brain drain. I think there's less of that now going out of Canada, but some of our top graduates in Canada tend to start out or go to the US, and this is a way to sort of backfill that gap that we're seeing. A second broad option is free trade agreements. NAFTA, or is it going to be the treaty formerly known as NAFTA soon, has a number of categories in the professional area for Americans and Mexicans. And those immigration options, those work permit options, they're going to stay in place with the new agreement. But depending on the citizenship of the potential candidate, there's other free trade agreements that sometimes has work permit options. We have one with Colombia, with Chile, with Peru, Korea, the Trans-Pacific, CETA with the EU. So this is a menu of options to sometimes get that person in for a few years and then again transition to permanent status. Another one we really like in our office, but we can't seem to use often, but it's out there. If the candidate you're looking at is a native French speaker, not from France, but from any country, North Africa, they have a French background sometimes from that region, Switzerland, there's what's called the Francophonie LMIA exempt category, where if they're coming to Canada, to any province outside of Quebec, and they're coming to a skilled position, that candidate can get a work permit directly by applying to Immigration Canada. It's a terrific program and one of the few programs I've been able to use to get up to a 5-year work permit out of the gate. And again, because of the way our system works under express entry, French-speaking candidates have an advantage because there's more points if you can speak French at a high level. So the transition to permanent status again is there. I want to turn now to labor market impact assessments, LMIAs. Jennifer mentioned those programs, and there's a few streams under the LMIA program. And as a corporate immigration lawyer, we want to avoid the LMIA process because it's an extra burden. But at least in Canada, we have this option. If I can't find something under a free trade agreement, if I can't use the Francophonie category, if I can't find some of the other, categories where you can apply directly to Immigration Canada for the work permit, there's always a fallback position for employers in Canada, and that's to seek a labor market impact assessment, LMIA. And really that's in the regular stream, that's where an employer is going to the market, trying to find a Canadian, doing the advertising to the LMIA requirements. And if they cannot find a qualified Canadian, they can then apply for this LMIA. And if that's granted, that is used to obtain a work permit. So we use this a lot for senior positions. We use this a lot for tech positions, high-skilled positions, where it's going to be difficult to find the skills in Canada. And one thing to keep in mind if you're an employer is from the outset, if that's where you think you have to go, you might have to use that program, do the recruiting up front in a manner that meets the high standards of the LMIA program. Lots of times people will come to us, we've got this candidate, do you recruit? Yes. Let's see the recruiting. Well, you got to do it again. You got to do it for at least 30 days because you haven't done it to program requirements, so that can delay things in terms of getting the LMIA. The LMIA program can be tough, but in my view, it's facilitative at the end of the day if you follow exactly the rules and the requirements. And in dealing with officers, they're very by the book, so you need to know the rules and have that in place up front. A great program for tech companies is a stream under the LMIA process, the GTS LMIA process, the Global Talent Stream. And the government in Canada has recognized that there's an issue in terms of shortages of tech workers, and this program addresses it. And why is it so good? You don't have to recruit for your software engineers, your software developers, your other IT professions. They have listed occupations. All the main IT occupations are there in this system or in this program. If you're going for a foreign worker in that stream, in one of those occupations, you use the GTS stream. And the cost of doing that, you have to come up with a labor market benefits plan with the government. You have to say, here's how we're going to address our shortage. And there's some negotiation around that. But it's generally a facilitative program. We've done lots of these labor market benefit plan negotiations on behalf of employers. So you're going to get the end result. You're going to get this GTS LMIA, and then you get 2-week processing. It's a fast track to then bring those workers at the work permit stage to Canada. Great program. And I think partly it addresses or recognizes that lots of people in the tech community or the tech area are coming out of the US to Canada and coming off of what they call H-1B work visas, coming off OPT, postgraduate visas in the States, and they are not getting the new H-1B or they're not getting the green card. And so the tech area is one where this program's a perfect fit for employers to recruit in, say, California, and then bring those workers that can't stay in the U.S. to Canada, where they know they can get transitioned to permanent resident status. And that's what I want to talk to next in terms of work permits. There's a bunch of different solutions, lots of options. They're here. What do you do now? Well, you want to transition them to permanent status. And Jennifer already talked a little bit about the express entry program. And again, it's predictability there that's key. So if you're recruiting up front, I have clients that do this, if with the information from the resume and the background, you can pretty much predict whether that person is going to have a good shot at express entry permanent residence. So I have one client, they put that into sort of their recruiting sort of mechanism, because at the start they were bringing in, it's a industry where demographically it's challenging to find people, and it's high skilled in a way, but you don't need university education. So they were bringing in some foreign nationals who just had high school education, which made it a real challenge to transition them to permanent status. We're able to do so with some of the provincial programs, the Ontario one, there's one in Alberta, one in BC, that helped address that. But now when they've given the message to the recruiters, find candidates with post-secondary education, because then we know we'll have a smooth transition to permanent status. So up front, doing some vetting on the chances of that candidate becoming a permanent resident. You can do that under express entry. One other thing to mention under express entry is, as an employer, how much control do you want over the process? Lawyers always want control over the process. And so the message from me is, often we're hired by employers, get the work permit and then support the transition. Do the application on our behalf and on the candidate's behalf. Because what I see in terms of coming to my office sometimes is someone comes in, an employer contacts us, a person's come to Canada, maybe under one of those international experience open work permits, you can get that for a year or two, and they're trying to transition to permanent status. And the employer says, okay, here's your letter, just go do it, or we're keeping a hands-off approach. And then you get this panic call later on from the employer, we've got this person and their application was bounced for whatever, some technical reason. The letter content wasn't correct, the wrong police certificate or whatever. And suddenly they're in a bind because that person perhaps has had their work permit lapse. They've tried to do an extension based on the fact they're going to have an express entry application, but it's denied, that extension is denied because the underlying express entry application might be bounced as being incomplete. So if you've got key workers, my message would be take a bit more of a hands-on approach, because if they screw it up, that might affect your ability to keep them working, and that can hurt you from a human resources standpoint. Okay, so that was, the 20,000-foot view of permanent resident stuff. And again, the message is there's often or usually a solution, and you can transition workers to permanent status. But it's not a free ride in a sense. There's some compliance requirements and some best practices that employers should consider. And I sort of split these into two things, the hiring stage and then the post-hiring stage in terms of making sure you're always compliant with the rules. I'm just going to hit on a few things, a few best practices to keep in mind. And some of this spins off to non-immigration areas, employment law, human rights, that sort of thing to keep in mind. So I already mentioned, but I'll just say it again, on the recruiting side, doing an assessment up front to look at the options, to look at if you're going to have to do the LMIA, is the salary you're planning to pay high enough to meet the prevailing wage requirements? And do we think that candidate can be spun into or transition into permanent status if you're looking for a long-term solution? So keep the immigration strategy in mind before the offer is made and get advice on that so you can have predictability in terms of what's going to happen. The second thing is, if you're making an offer to a foreign national, make it conditional on them obtaining and maintaining proper authorization to work in Canada. Pretty simple, but often people rely on their usual employment offers, and that language might not be in there. You don't want a binding contract from the employment law side and then find out they can't get that work permit. And we put that in there even where the employer, of course, is going to be supporting and sponsoring that application. Even though we think it's going to come through, we have that language in there to protect the employer. Human rights sometimes comes into this, and the classic situation we see, and I don't know if there's a perfect answer to this, is we've just hired someone, we asked them if they could work legally in Canada, they said they could, they came in a few weeks later and gave us, we got that work permit to make sure they could work in Canada, and it's ending in 2 months. And it turns out to be one of those work permits that is not renewable in that category. So a post-grad work permit, 3 years, you can't get another one. International experience class type of work permit, 1 year, 2 years, depending on what country the program is with, you can't renew it. And I wish I had a good answer for this, because from the human rights side, they say you can ask, can you legally work in Canada? And the answer is yes, if you're a foreign national and you have this open work permit. It's not, you're not allowed, the human rights side would say, can you work for us for the next 12 months or the next 6? You can't ask that. So there's not a perfect answer to that gap, but you got to keep in mind in your recruiting and questioning side, what can you do from a human rights side and what you can't do, because you don't want to create a situation where they might have a human rights complaint. If you ask those questions and then don't hire them, it's possible that you're going to face a human rights complaint.
Can I just jump on that one? So one of the solutions that we recommend the client is ask for SIN number, because that's allowed. And if SIN number started with a 9, that's not a permanent resident. So anybody who has a SIN number starting with a 9 have expiry date. So that's a fair call to make. Second thing about the human rights issues, you cannot ask them about the family composition. And if you are moving people, unless they're really desperate, they want to move with a family. Sometimes, like I dealt with a C-level executive who's earning million plus. They don't want to be by themselves. So there has to be a solution for the whole family. So how do you ask upfront about the family composition? Because are you married? How many children you have? That can be an issue with respect to human rights issue. So recently, a lot of my employers basically introduced me to their workers and said, this is immigration lawyer. She's going to assess about your work permit and your permanent resident solution. She's a lawyer, so she has to ask this question, and which is true. That put me in a very awkward position because I'm asking all this, do you have a criminal record? How many children you have? How old are they? Where they're from? Where they're born? What's their passport? Yada, yada, yada. And if I find something about the worker, how do I disclose this to employer? So one of the things that I say right off the bat is, I work for employer XYZ, period. If I discover anything here will affect your right to work in Canada, I must disclose to both parties. But I'm going to give you 48 hours, come out and deal with the damage in your own way. Then I must disclose, because employer going to ask, well, Jennifer, how come, this person is from United States, it should go to Niagara Falls, hunky-dory, we get a work permit. Why are you saying this is going to take 4 months? Because he had a DUI and I have to get the special permit to get him in. I can't say that until that issue is dealt with. So I don't know the recruitment part of what's allowed and not allowed to screening candidates under the human right and employment law, because I don't practice those. But that's one of the solutions that we have suggested to employers. So far it's kind of working out, but it's been an interesting ride.
Yeah, and just on the SIN number, in terms of, is an employer obligation to ask for the SIN number within 3 days of hire, but our recommendation there is you're going to make this conditional offer as once that offer is made, the SIN number can be requested. You want to get that before the start date. If you see a 9 at the start of that SIN number, then they're a foreign worker, and you also need to get the copy of the work permit proof that they're authorized to work in Canada, and you want to do that before the start date, not 2 days after. So there's that obligation as an employer to make sure the person's authorized when you see that they're a foreign national, if they're authorized to work in Canada. So just a few more points on the hiring, or the last part of the hiring. I don't know, I always have to look up the title of this, the Employment Protection for Foreign Nationals Act. Has everyone read that? So in Ontario, it's relatively recent legislation that is sort of like the Employment Standards Act, but if you're hiring a foreign national in Ontario, there's certain obligations that this act places on an employer. The two most important being, you've got to provide them with a printout brochure handout that the ministry says you must give every foreign national hire in Ontario, or you're in violation of the legislation. And secondly, broadly speaking, it says you as an employer can't claw back or charge back or make that foreign national employee sort of pay for the work permit and LMIA process. So the LMIA fee is an employer fee. You can't have the worker reimburse you or pay you that back. That would be illegal under the Act. Then the last broad point is post-hire, some things to keep in mind and best practices. So number one, changing terms of employment for a foreign national. Before you ever do that, you've got to look at their underlying work permit. For example, if it was a labor market impact assessment, you've promised the government you're going to keep them in that job with that salary, you're not going to change it. So an upward or downward change might make you in violation of your LMIA, might make that worker illegal. Second, document retention. If you're hiring foreign nationals, There can be inspections, and the government says you must keep all your documentation around the recruitment and the hiring of that foreign national for up to 6 years, because the government has a 6-year window to do an inspection from the first day of employment of that foreign worker. And lastly, I keep harking on this, consider moving in the permanent status, because that can be in the employer's interest. By doing that, by moving to a permanent status, you no longer have obligations as an employer from an immigration standpoint. The conditions that the regulation the government has placed on employers where you have a work permit holder fall away the day they become a permanent resident. So that's a way to minimize exposure to inspections and to non-compliance. So those are my comments, and again, the message is Canada's open for business in terms of attracting, keeping, and maintaining skilled workers, and that's going to address some of your skills shortages. Thank you.
So I just want to tag along one more point on the last point Bill was talking about. After foreign national come to work in Canada, criminality. People do not know what is allowed, not allowed. So biggest thing last 12 months has been DUI. So for example, DUI in Australia is a traffic act. DUI in Michigan State is a traffic act. In Canada is a criminal code act, and it is a serious criminality. It will get a permanent resident deported. So any foreign worker, any temporary worker, visitor, student, work permit, anybody who's on the limited work permit-wise, if they get convicted of anything, so I'm talking about shoplifting as bad as, if they plea bargain out on $100 with the 10-hour community services, I'm just letting you know they will get the deportation order within 30 days. So it's a very, very serious, after you do all this work, get them in, then they come and say, oh, by the way, I got this notice to get out in 2 weeks. It's a bad call. So I cannot emphasize how important that is, especially DUI, because Asian countries, oceanic countries, Scotland, Ireland, British nationals, and some part of the United States, DUI is not considered as criminal code violation. It's traffic act and creates a whole whack of a problem. So just to be aware of that. And with respect to the, when we talk about the foreign student, how bad can it be? I believe as of December, we were talking to the Border Services officer in Toronto Airport, which is the business airport in Canada. He was talking about issuing per day about 23 to 25 study permit per day. So you multiply that as 365, we're talking about 65,000 in one airport. You multiply by at least 3 airport, the MTV, Montreal, Toronto, Vancouver, we're talking about a 200,000 student. Just 50% of them are married, which means we have 100,000 spouses on work permit. So in total, we're talking about 300,000 people potentially walking into our country be able to work. That is an amazing amount of people that we can grab. We do have 2 universities and one of the biggest colleges in Canada. I mean, they are out there. You just have to find them strategically.
Well, thank you to both Jennifer and Bill. I used to work at the Workplace Safety and Insurance Board, and I thought there was a lot of short forms there. But then I attended today's session, so I want to thank you for dissuading me that there's another field in Canada where there's a lot of short forms. But the takeaway, the essential for businesses to get in order to get the talent that they need, because this is one of the huge sources. It's technical and precise, and you need to get professionals to give you some help on that. Maybe start with Bill. I got a few questions, and then I'll look to the audience if there's any other questions. And I think at the end you'll stick around for a few minutes, both of you. If there's some specific questions around you and your business, they'll be happy to answer some questions. But in the few minutes that we have left, we've heard a lot in the news and other places, Bill, about U.S. entry and immigration difficulties. with everything that's happened in the U.S., have those developments in the more stringent immigration in the U.S., has that had an impact here corporately for bringing people into Canada? I mean, in a positive way, I would imagine?
Yeah, the so-called Trump effect is real, and we get feedback from our clients going into the U.S. and getting work permits there that there's been more pushback. And I think the Canadian government has recognized it as an opportunity in a way because of the restrictions in the U.S., because of the attitude. We're seeing an uptick in part on the student side, more students coming here rather than the U.S., choosing Canada. And in terms of workers who can't, I mentioned, continue on H-1Bs or other U.S. types of work permits, looking to Canada. And where I've seen a big change over the last few years are U.S.-based companies or companies outside of Canada setting up specifically in Canada in the tech area, knowing they can get the work permit and then transition to promise those workers that they're going to become permanent workers and permanent status holders here in Canada. So it's a boon, I think, for Canada, the restrictive side on the U.S., or the feeling that there's that attitude of restriction in the U.S.
Jennifer, I would think about, you both did a good job of sort of describing what the process is in general. There's most of business in Canada, small and medium-sized business. So when they're looking to hire, they need talent, they kind of say, yeah, we would be happy to go through the process of foreign nationals coming here or immigrants coming from outside of Canada. Many of those small businesses wouldn't even know where to start. So there's immigration lawyers. What are some of the steps to sort of just go through so that we can be describing to our members and to small business, there is a to-do list so you can access the talent that's available?
That's a really loaded question there. Real estate agents says location, location, location. I think immigration lawyers plan, and plan again. Immigration law changes constantly. That's another problem. So we do a lot of initial plan, but a lot of revision as we go. Some of my clients stay with me 5 to 8 years because they usually start with, I want passport, Jennifer, like Canadian passport, I love them. It's like, so do I. And you're a visitor from XYZ country. So by the time we finish the work, it could be 8 years. Checking out a website is always a good idea to check out what you're facing. One of the areas that I really want to recommend is that the ESDC, Employment Social Development Canada website with respect to recruitment, because you really need to do good job posting. So I'm going to talk about job posting with respect to the newcomers as well. No Canadian work experience does help. Like that will attract a lot of newcomers to begin with. Number 2, make language as an asset is also a good attraction. Where you post job is also, I think, is attractive. The Perry is here from Y Employment and the Immigration. I believe over 90% of their clients are newcomers. She can, like her staff, literally grab your job post and put it in front of a newcomer who have a certain qualification right off the bat. They can do some job posting right off, like they can do some recruitment right off bat for you. I love schools. I love career centers and universities and colleges where international students will look at for their 20 hours work allowance. They will look at the job posting there. Putting in the international work experience always attract them, and their spouses, because they usually go to school to pick up their spouses, or they hang out together, cafeteria, whatever. And then that's a great place that you can attract the newcomer as well. In terms of getting help, I experienced about last 12 months, 18 months, employer just to call and said, Jennifer, I look at the website, I look at the whatever, I just want to sit down and you just tell me everything. And I'm like, okay, so hour and a half, let's go. So we, You know, some people basically, I guide them through certain criteria. Yes, you're right. Small businesses, they don't have an HR department. Sometimes I look at the clients. So who's gonna run this recruitment? And he's like, you're looking at him, and you are the president, you're the CFO, you're the COO, and you're the accountant, all in one. And they're like, yeah. And my wife can help out on this one. I was like, okay. You know, some reality check as to what's possible, what's not possible. One of the biggest recruitment issue is a job bank. How many people use a job bank? Okay, lucky of us that those are people who never used it. It is atrocious, and their 1-800 number is lovely people, but it's impossible to get through. It is a mandatory website. You must recruit. So sometimes I do like job bank 101 for my client as well, because they don't even know how to register sometimes. So yeah, good help goes a long way, absolutely.
Bill, one of the things that the underlying theme is risk mitigation, understanding what you're getting into, what your responsibilities are. And I think for businesses, and recognizing we're videotaping this, we'll have this on our website. We want others that aren't here today to be able to kind of get this as a look at this and say, here are the issues that I need to look at. But risk is one of those things for business. So you've hired maybe a foreign national. What if it doesn't work out? Are there special considerations for employers? What do you need to be aware of so that you're not putting your business at risk, even though you're trying to get the talent? Because as we all know, whether they're foreign nationals, immigrants, refugees, or Canadian-born, you're going to have hires that don't work out. What are some of those things that people should think about?
Right. Sometimes, unfortunately, the relationship just doesn't work out, and you may have to end it. So there's some special considerations if it's a foreign national on a work permit here in Canada. The best thing to do in terms of being proactive to mitigate that risk is getting back to having a good hiring practice and having an employment contract in place, which is going to specifically talk about what happens upon termination, and maybe also specifically address what happens in terms of relocation back to the home country, those sorts of costs. Because if that's not covered, the argument is that's a foreseeable damage if you terminate a foreign national. They can't then, in most cases, if they have an employer-specific work permit, they can't cross the street and look for a job. They can't mitigate their damages. So there's that higher exposure under our notice laws if they can't look for a job in Canada because they have an employer-specific work permit. And the second broad thing to consider is, are they in a permanent resident process that if termination occurs, will that undermine that process? Lots of nuance to that, so I'm not going to get into it. But knowing that, if you're sponsoring that employee for permanent resident status, the timing of a termination may undermine or end their bid for permanent status. So that's another thing you should look at if considering termination of a foreign national.
I think also that I talked about Ontario provisional nominee where employer can sponsor employee. One of the requirements to complete that application, employee must be working for that company until the end when they get the permanent resident. Unfortunately, our process does not go as fast. So if a work application is done properly, usually 12 to 14 month process from the day of application for permanent resident, but some application go 2+ years for various reasons. So they must be working for that employer. So I had a couple of situations, the employer called and said, you know, market shifted, things happen in business, we have to let this particular person go. They can. Like nothing in the immigration law stop employer for terminating given all the notice period, the employment law, can be met. It's great. But morally speaking, ethically speaking, it creates an incredible dilemma for employer, knowing that if I dismiss this particular employee, their whole application come down to the ground, and they have no option but return to whichever country they are from. And most of them have families, and the children already settled in Canada, and that creates a huge issue. So I usually, when we started Ontario, the sponsorship, I usually meet with employer, employee together And I actually tell them right off the bat, your commitment is the next 3 to 4 years. Are we clear on that? And the most employer, because of lack of the shortage of work, they actually agree with that, and they already have a really good relationship with employees, so they will jump into it. But yes, there is some consequences. May not be legal, but certainly moral, and that also, I mean, when termination happens in the workplace, it's not about that employee sometimes, it's the rest of the employee going to look and say, am I next? And a situation like this is more dramatic.
Okay, we're just about out of time. Maybe, is there a question from the floor? Ma'am, just at the back here.
Well, I have a whole list, but I'll try and get one that maybe everybody's interested in. We have an employee here from Ireland on a work permit, 2 years. So you're talking about trying to get them to move to permanent. So when should that action be started?
Yesterday.
Yesterday.
Yeah. But if he's from Ireland, how old is he?
22, 25?
He speaks good English.
Yes.
Education, pretty good.
Yes.
Post-secondary.
Yes.
Yeah, he probably have a pretty good chance to convert, but I would move fairly fast.
Okay, and along with that, when he came across, he was given a SIN number, which started with a 9.
Yep.
Is he supposed to go get a health card?
After 90 days. So this is where the kicker comes. When you bring the temporary resident in, if their work permit is longer than 6 months and working full-time, they can get Ontario health insurance. After 90 days, they resided in Ontario. But by the time the postage happened, that the will of the justice work out, it's actually about a 5 month. So usual recommendation I make to all my employer is providing the private health insurance for first 6 months, just to make sure. And I've done 2 inspections last 12 months with respect to that. That's number 1 items. Everybody getting into trouble. So about a 6 month, I think usually about $600 give or take on their health condition, age, etc.
And just one more comment on that. I mean, it sounds like it's one of those 2-year work abroad programs, which is quite popular with Irish or UK nationals, and so that won't be renewable. So that's another reason to look to permanent status quite early, because if you can get into the pool, if you can get selected, there's a mechanism to get what's called a bridging work permit while that permanent resident application is processing, to cover off any time after that 2-year work permit. And just one other quick note, I talked about terminations and things like that. We are going to come out on our Gowling's immigration newsletter. There's an article come out in the next few weeks on employment and termination of foreign nationals, which will cover some of those things. So maybe sign up for that, and you'll get that newsletter on that topic with some more detail. Thanks.
Okay, we're out of time for this morning. I think you'll stick around for a few minutes if there's any more specific questions. I want to thank both Jennifer and Bill for your time and expertise today. As a token of our appreciation, I've got a book for each of you called County Roots Global Reach. It's the story of Waterloo Region so far, told from a business perspective, so thank you. Okay, and I'll just quickly finish up here. Before we conclude, I'd like to thank our presenting sponsor once again. The partnership we have with the Immigration Partnership of Waterloo Region is one that we value and is so important to the business community, but also for the region as a whole. So thank you to them for their continued support in offering these important programs and discussions. Thank you to Doubletree by Hilton Kitchener for hosting us, and of course to all of you for attending